For every kid that didn't have a chance, and every kid that was out of options, Seattle Children's is fighting for you. Because this isn't about beating the odds. It's about changing them for all kidkind.
Hello, I am Laura Kastner, and I'm happy to join you all for this series of Parent Ed Talks as your series moderator. I am a clinical psychologist and a clinical professor at University of Washington in the departments of psychiatry and behavioral sciences and the Department of Psychology. I'm also the author of several books on parenting and child development for parents. And I have a clinical practice in which I see children, couples, and families. So on behalf of ParentMap, we are thrilled to have put together a pool of some of the best parenting media in the country: Chicago Parent, Metro Parent, New York Family, and Staten Island Parent, to bring you the 2023-2024 Parent Ed Talk series. Thank you for joining us today for today's Parent Ed Talk event. It's called Atypical Approaches, Unlock Your Brilliance of Your Differently Wired Kid with Debbie Reber. On behalf of our magnificent parenting media partners across the country, it's our honor to have a collective passion and business to build inclusive, safe, and educated and loving communities for our families. We are laser focused on how to be better at serving families, and we will never settle for the status quo. Before we kick off learning with Debbie, please take a moment to let us know what city you are joining from and put your answers into the Zoom chat. While we let everybody respond, we have a few housekeeping items. Today's webinar will be recorded and it can be republished for educational and promotional usage. We will email everyone who is registered a link to the recording after the event. We would love to hear your thoughts. The Zoom chat feature is open for you to share your comments and your questions throughout the event. After the presentation, we will host a Q&A session. We encourage you to ask questions and we will do our best to incorporate them. Closed captioning may be enabled by clicking the Zoom closed caption or CC at the bottom of your screen. So I'd love to hear where some of you are from: Maple Valley, Washington, Chicago, Illinois, Snoqualmie, okay, Duwamish, Huddleston, Virginia, Seattle, Bainbridge Island, Detroit, Michigan, Colfax, Washington, Edmonds, Washington, so many places. Okay, we haven't gotten any international ones this time, but we can hope for that for the next one. So thank you for sharing all that. Okay, on to introducing Debbie. Debbie Reber is a parenting activist, best-selling author, speaker, and the CEO and founder of Tilt Parenting. Tilt Parenting is a resource, a top-performing podcast, and a community with a focus on shifting the paradigm for parents raising and embracing neurodivergent children. Her most recent book, Differently Wired: A Parent's Guide to Raising an Atypical Child with Confidence and Hope, came out in June 2018. After living abroad in the Netherlands for 5 years, Debbie, her husband, and their Differently Wired team moved to Brooklyn, New York in 2019. And let me add, as a psychologist who has been meeting with families with differently wired children for decades, I love this book. And want all my patients, families that I work with, to read this book. I really feel, Debbie, that I could skip the first 10 appointments I have with some of these families if they read every word of your book. So thank you for giving us this book and being here today. And with that, I'll pass the torch to you here.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you so much. That means a lot coming from you. I appreciate that. And I'm so happy to be here today. And I love that I saw Brooklyn was in the house too. So we're in the same neighborhood. I'm happy that you're here. And I am going to share my screen and we'll kind of get going because we have a lot to get through and I want to leave a lot of time for questions as well. Okay. Here we go. Okay, so Laura just gave a brief intro. I just want to share that my kind of focus in the work that I do through Till Parenting is really on the parenting experience. So rather than, here are the 5 things to do to help your kid do X, Y, and Z, I'm focusing on how can we as parents pay attention to our experience in relationship with our kid. I think that is everything. Everything in how we can show up for our kids, and it makes such a difference in our dynamic. So we'll talk about that today. Let's see if I get my slides working here. Okay. So I work with a lot of parents, and these are some of the common things that I hear. Some of them might be familiar to you. I hear from parents, and with some shame and guilt thrown in, I don't really always enjoy being around my child. If the kid is very dysregulated, there's that sense of walking on eggshells all the time to not dysregulate a child. I hear from a lot of parents who have more than one kid that there's that sibling dynamic is really tricky, and there could be resentment from one or the other siblings. It can be really hard when one child is using up so many of the resources for the family, whether those are financial or just energetic resources. So many parents are burned out, especially coming out of COVID. I hear that from a lot of families. Families who say my kid is not really talking to me, so I'm kind of shut out of what's really going on. And then this last one of just really being in this kind of a spin cycle of chaos, really, kind of stuck and in a rut and not knowing how to get out of that. So I don't know if those are things that any of you watching this relate to. This is still part of my world sometimes, depending on what's happening from the day to day. So again, what I do and what I hope to share with you today is to think about how can we support ourselves in parenting these complex kids. There are so many ways that we can do this. We can work on managing our own energy and our own resources. We can work towards coming to a deeper place of acceptance for what's hard and what's actually going on in our lives with our kids. But what I love that we're going to be talking about today is deepening connection with our child. I love this topic because it's really about leaning in to what's happening. And I want to also recognize that's not always our instinct. If we are feeling burned out or frustrated, or when the dynamic is kind of stuck, our instinct might not be to, I'm going to dive in even deeper. But that's what we're going to be talking about today, to really prioritize connection. So here is what I know about deep connection. Being in deep connection in relationship with our child is really at the heart of making this dynamic, this spin cycle, feel so much better. And it supports our kids and our families and ourselves in so many ways. But this really is what it all comes down to, this deep connection. And I want to share a concept from people I'm sure you're familiar with, Dr. Dan Siegel and Dr. Tina Payne Bryson. They have written a number of books together, fantastic books. One of my favorites is The Power of Showing Up. And they talk about this thing called the triad of connection in that book. It's based on Dr. Bruce Perry's work, the triad of connection. But this is a framework that outlines these 3 key elements that create a strong connection between a parent and a child. So first, there is perceive. That's where we're noticing a child's signals and their behaviors. We're really paying attention to all their cues. They might be verbal, they might be nonverbal, could be their tone of voice, their facial expression, their body language, right? They're always communicating with us. The way that I talk about this in my book, Differently Wired, and in my work is this idea of becoming fluent in our kids' unique language. So it's really about being attuned to the way that they're expressing their needs and their feelings and their experiences, the way that they're expressing those things and expressing their reality. It's also how we are communicating with our kids, right? In a way that makes it easier for them to receive what we have to share. So that's perceive. Then there is making sense. So this is really about interpreting. It's understanding the child's perspective and empathizing with their emotions and their needs. So that is part of fluency. We need to know how to interpret what's going on. Taking that metaphor of being fluent to the making sense aspect of the triad, it's really about coming up with kind of like our own foreign language dictionary, if you will. So we have our own translation guide. So we can be able to, on the fly, interpret what's going on. And so we're really seeking to understand our kids on that really deep level. That helps them feel seen and it helps them feel heard. Then the third part of the triad is responding. And that is really taking sensitive and appropriate action to meet our kids' needs. That could be providing comfort, it could be offering support. It's really saying or doing the most appropriate thing for any situation. So I love this kind of a framework to start with. By practicing this, perceiving, making sense, and responding, we are really working to create a secure attachment with our kids. And we know how important secure attachment is in terms of their really having positive outcomes with their emotional and social development. So this is a nice place to start, but I want to take a few minutes to share some other examples about what deep connection, in the way that I'm talking about it, what it really looks like. So there's this idea of trust. So when we are in deep connection with our child, they trust us. They feel safe and secure with us. They know that they can rely on us for support and guidance. That could be us as parents. They can also have this trusting relationship with other adults in their lives. It could be a teacher, a relative, that amazing aunt, someone who really gets them. So trust is a big piece of this. Open communication is part of deep connection, and being able to really talk with each other about everything where both parties feel heard and understood. This is really what we're going for with our kids. So the big goal with open communication is to have truly reciprocal communication. I want to just acknowledge that's going to look different. It's not necessarily two people sitting, a child and parent sitting across from each other and having this back and forth. That might be over text. It might look so many different ways, but it's that there is a back and forth of communication. Then there's empathy and understanding. And that is where we want to be able to put ourselves in our kids' shoes and understand their perspective, even if we don't always agree with their choices or we don't kind of compute the way that they're interpreting something or experiencing something. We always want to offer empathy and understanding. It's so important. Quality time together is another aspect of having that deep connection. And that is just like enjoying spending time together and prioritizing that relationship. And that could be through a shared interest. And we'll talk about that in a little bit, or just spending time together, talking and laughing, being silly, whatever that looks like. Emotional support. This is another aspect of deep connection. A parent being there for our kids during difficult times and really helping them navigate their challenges and their dysregulation and their big, big emotions. So it's so important, especially as our kids get older. I'm not sure what the age range is for those of you here today, but this deep connection is so important as our kids get older because we want them to know that they can come to us with anything and that we are emotionally safe for them. So deep connection means really having that felt sense of safety. Then there's respect and autonomy. This is really important. Again, can be challenging as our kids start to individuate and make different choices, but it's so important that we as parents and caregivers and adults in these kids' lives respect our kids' individuality and really support them in making their own choices while providing guidance and scaffolding and support along the way. But they really need to feel respected. And then that sense of unconditional love, right? We want our kids to feel that we love them no matter what, that we accept them no matter what for exactly who they inherently are. So going back to Tina Bryson and Dan Siegel's work in The Power of Showing Up, I love that book, by the way, so much. I highly recommend it if you haven't read it. But I really love the way that they frame deep connection as really ensuring that our kids feel seen and understood. And they have a quote from that book I wanted to share with you. The ultimate aim is to simply be present to your children, to create space and time to get to know them better and to understand them at a deeper level so you can help them grow into the fullness of who they are. I love that, the fullness of who they are. So being known through connection, sorry, let me go back. I skipped a slide in my mind. Not being known through connection, this can, especially for a neurodivergent kid, this is true for all kids, by the way, but especially for a neurodivergent kid, they may go through their life feeling misunderstood. They may already feel that. They may be getting feedback from so many spaces that they're in, environments and classrooms and clubs and sports teams where they are not fully embraced or understood for the way that they show up. And so when they don't feel that sense of deep connection with the adults in their world, this is going to contribute to that. And their strengths are likely going to be ignored or not nurtured. They may develop low self-worth. They may grow up with this kind of sense of internalized shame. And we hear this from so many people. So many neurodivergent adults that I talk with are really unpacking that now as they're discovering their own wiring. So this sense of not being deeply connected and seen can play out really negatively throughout their life and can impact their future relationships. But when our kids feel known and they are deeply connected, they are secure enough to take healthy risks. They can get to know themselves better, which I think is one of the most powerful things we can do for our neurodivergent kids, is help them really grow up knowing who they are on such a deep level. That's going to help them access the supports that they need, advocate for themselves, and it's going to help them know that they're just not too much. Again, they're likely getting messages from some people in their orbit that they are too much. So being known through deep connection is going to help to counter that message. So I'm pretty sure that you're convinced by now that it's worth it for us to prioritize deep connection. I want to share one last motivation, and this comes from my friend, Dr. John Duffy. And he wrote another great book. Sorry, I always reference a ton of books when I talk, so maybe you're jotting them down or someone can share them in the chat. But John Duffy wrote a great book called Parenting the New Teen in the Age of Anxiety. And one of the through lines throughout his whole book is how critical it is for our kids, especially adolescents, that we are in deep connection with them and have that sense of trust and relationship that can protect them from so many things that they may be exposed to. Substance abuse, risky behavior can help protect them from mental health challenges like depression and anxiety. And so John sees our role as parents and teachers and really any important adults in our kids' lives as being that emotional support, which helps our kids then be more resilient in the face of challenges. And it helps us to better know what's really going on with them, with our kids. So he talks about this concept called, sorry, I don't know how I went back so far. He talks about this concept called the, sorry, bear with me. I don't know really how I did that. Okay, here we go. It was worth the wait. The emotional bank account. I love this idea. And it's just a metaphor for the amount of trust and goodwill and emotional connection that exists between two people in a relationship. So if you think about an emotional bank account that our kid might have, any positive interactions we have with our kids, that could be when we really empathize with them or we really understand, that is going to go into positive balance in that emotional bank account. negative interactions, criticism, disrespecting our kids, betraying their trust, right? Looking at their texts behind their back, whatever that is, that's going to withdraw from that emotional bank account. He calls this the EBA. And he says to increase the EBA, we connect with them. So we set aside the lecture and we focus on connection. We play with our kids, we laugh with them, we create like private jokes with them. We really dig in and learn all that we can about the world. And he shares this quote, a positive balance trumps nearly every other factor in parenting. So this is really, I can't overestimate how important this is. This idea of really focusing on and prioritizing deep connection with our kids. So I do want to spend a minute before I get into strategies for how to do this, just acknowledging some of the challenges. Oh my goodness, I don't know what's going on with my slides here. I've never had this happen before. Okay, sorry about that. I want to acknowledge what gets in the way because, I talked about this at the very beginning, some of these ideas, these thoughts and beliefs that parents have about what's hard in their lives right now. We might be navigating challenges with school, especially this time of year. Like October seems to be when things start to deteriorate pretty quickly. The shine of the new school year is worn off. And so school challenges, we might be struggling with intense behaviors that we don't know how to navigate. We might be dealing with challenges from friends or family or other people who just don't get what we're going through. And so we're feeling really isolated. So no matter what the challenges are, it's our interpretation of those that gets in the way. So what we're making those challenges mean, right? I don't have time to go into this too deeply. This is really what I focus on in Tilt. But if we're interpreting our kids' behavior in a way that we're making it mean that we're failing as parents, we might really then start to get mired down in feelings of deep disappointment or frustration or overwhelm or exhaustion, anger, all of those feelings. And so when we're in that space and we're feeling those big feelings, again, our first instinct likely isn't going to be, I'm going to spend more time with this human. I'm going to like dive in and do all the things. Sometimes for me, my instinct would be like, I'm going to pack a bag and jump in the car. I'll maybe be back in a week. So our feelings are a big part of this equation. Then we have difficult family dynamics. I think I'm on the right slide here. Sorry, you guys. Yeah, difficult family dynamic, including if there's stuff going on with our siblings. So that also can be really tricky. I hear from a lot of parents who are struggling with the fact that their family's life is severely being impacted, right? Or they can only go on certain vacations, or holidays have to be navigated in a certain way. And they're really being driven by the needs of one child, and that can create some resentment. Also, sorry, here we go again. Let's see if I can do this. Okay. This is another thing I hear from parents. I'm not interested in Minecraft. Like my kid is all Minecraft or all Roblox all day. It's not really my thing. So if we don't appreciate the things our kids are into, that can be hard. We may not appreciate the very, very deep areas of interest our child has. Some of them go really deep. They want to spend hours and weeks talking about heraldry or some kind of obscure thing. So if we're not into that, it makes sense that that would be a barrier to our feeling more connected with them. And then again, I just want to acknowledge so many of us are just burnt out. So exhaustion, being depleted. We may just feel like we don't have the capacity to really do this work and prioritize that. A lot of us, our own emotional bank account is pretty empty. So I want to just say that up front. Those are some very real barriers to more deeply connecting with our kids. So it is important to kind of get real about that and just be honest, like, okay, this is what's going on for me. and do like a little assessment on yourself and think about how can I do a little reframing so I can get in a better place with my feelings so that I can open the door to this deeper connection that we're talking about today. So I like this. John Duffy talks about when we're not in a good space with our connection with our kid. He says we should execute the hard reset and also talk with our kids about it. Be really honest about it, especially with our older kids. He says you can recognize out loud that your relationship as it stands is not working, but that you intend to do your part in changing the dynamic between the both of you right now. So if you're listening to this and you're like, yeah, this is where we are, it's okay. You just push the big reset button, you acknowledge it, talk to your kids about it, and set that intention to changing that dynamic and to doing things differently. Okay, so now the ideas. I'm going to share some ideas for deepening connection. I'm going to share a bunch of ideas, and I don't want you to watch this and think, I need to do all of these things. I'm hoping that as you're watching, one or two of these ideas will resonate, and then you can play with it in your family, and you'll feel kind of sparked to experiment and see how it goes. So one of my favorite ways to foster connection is to create rituals. I love a good ritual. A lot of our kids love rituals. A lot of our kids like routines and they know what's going on. So there's so many ways to do this. You likely are already doing this now, so you could lean more into those. Could be walks in the morning, stopping once a week for tea and a cookie or an ice cream after school. Maybe you have a garden patch you go to on the way home from gymnastics. Game night is a great ritual, family game night, depending on how games go in your family. I know that can be tricky for some kids. Movie night. We used to have a movie night blanket. It was like this random, I think it was a Cartoon Network gray fleece blanket from when I worked there 20 years ago. We laid out that blanket and suddenly it was movie night. Baking stuff together, family meetings, pizza Saturdays. There's so many ways to do this. But the thing that's so powerful about rituals is that they kind of inherently provide kids with that sense of security and identity and belonging. They're predictable, which a lot of our kids crave predictability. They're safe and they're known. So one of our favorite rituals that I used to do, and I'm trying to bring back into our world right now, is working on a puzzle, a jigsaw puzzle. It's totally puzzle season, right? While listening to a podcast. My kid and I like to listen to Radio Lab. So that's one of our little things. So think about, are there any rituals that you could create? And if you are doing them, you can actually just name them. Like, we're going to do our ritual, or you could come up with a name with your child for it together. So it's kind of your little secret. All right, we want to savor. This is another way to foster deep connection. Savor and really live in the present. Savoring, I think, is about being in moments. As I was working on this presentation today, I was sitting in a coffee shop with my kid across from me, who was working on a coding language and having an iced coffee and a Belgian waffle. And so I just kind of took a moment to stop working on this presentation and just look at my kid. The way that their hair was like falling in front of their eye, like it just kind of soaked them in, right? So this is something that I do. I don't know if it's because, my child's older and I know that eventually they're going to launch. So I'm soaking this in even more, but to me, taking the time to really just notice and soak in our kids, it strengthens that love and connection that we feel for our kids, and they feel that too. So I don't know if you're religious or kind of on a spiritual level, but really like look at them for who they are as this unique human on their own journey. And we get the honor of being their person in this lifetime. I think it's an incredible thing. Okay, we can ask questions and lean into the power of the pause. So I'm a big fan of asking for advice. Ask your kids for advice and then wait and hear what they have to say. they're going to feel really seen and like you care about what they have to say, or what their perspective is. Even with littles, get their advice. Ask them questions about all kinds of things, what they think about something, what's important to them, what do they find really silly. Just ask them a lot of questions. And then the second part of it, leaning into the power of the pause, is really important, because we often tend to jump in before we give them a chance to respond. Sometimes the really juicy stuff comes after an uncomfortably long silence, which, for me, I like to fill the space. So I'm working on this one. But just ask lots of questions. It helps our kids really feel that we care about what they think. And we do. I'm sure that we all do. Be curious and dive into their worlds. And this image here is from a text adventure game that has a couple of pictures in it called Inkerhead. And I share that because my kid's a gamer, and I have learned I'm not a gamer. My husband is. I am not, but I will watch my child play a game. I will ask them to go through a game with me, to teach me how to do something, ask them to show me how to do something. How did you do that? I'd love to learn. Can you show me? Really being genuinely curious, whether it's an instrument that they play or, again, a video game. Gosh, to ask your child if they can explain the build that they're doing in Minecraft and why they came up with that idea, and it means so much to them. So even if you're not into Minecraft, I encourage you to put that aside and try to dive in. All right, I'm keeping an eye on the clock and we're almost through, but I'll share a few more ideas. So I talked about respect before, how important it is that our kids feel that we trust them. I love to share the quote from Ned Johnson and Bill Stixrud in their also amazing book, The Self-Driven Child. They say how important it is that we make our kids know that we believe in their ability to make decisions and to learn from their mistakes. That to me is so powerful. I know my parents, I did not feel that they trusted me. They didn't trust me. I'll just say that they did not trust me. They probably didn't have reason to, but it did not set up a great dynamic, right? Kind of starting with that place. So we really want to go out of our way to find opportunities to make sure our kids do feel that we trust them and that we respect them and that we see them as their own person. That is going to pay off in spades as they get older. We want to redefine our role. This is kind of related to that. But if we think about our job as parents of these kids, it is to guide, to support, and to love them. It is not to control them. It's not to gain compliance. It's not to force will our kids to be the person that we think they should be. So this redefinition, this reframing, that we're our kids' coach, we're their mentor, we're consulting, we're guiding them, it allows us to really show up for them in a way that doesn't have our own feelings and expectations enmeshed and making things really messy. So I love this. And I'll just share this quick quote. I am going to wrap up in 2 minutes. This comes from Chris Baum, who wrote a great book called Finding the Magic in Middle School. He says, if you see an adolescent as someone on an epic adventure, an adventurer does not need a boss traveling with them. They need a good companion, someone who will jump in when they're about to hurt themselves, but most of the time is there to help them enjoy the adventure. That's the idea of companioning. So that's my new favorite definition for our role, to be our kids' companion. And I just love this reframe. I think about it all the time. We talked earlier about how important it is that our kids feel understood, and that means showing up with empathy and validation. This is a huge factor when we are working to deeply connect with our kids. We want them to come with us, and we want them to not get defensive when they share with us. We want to kind of co-regulate, help them calm down, and we can do that by validating what they're experiencing. Doesn't mean we agree with them, but we're validating the very realness of their emotional experience in that moment. And that means so much. breaking the rules and go rogue. It's kind of self-explanatory by the picture of the ice cream, but I'm a big fan of, often it involves food, but like, you know what? We had a plan, but I'm ditching the plan and let's just do something just for fun. That can create connection. It creates a little bit of like, we're playing hooky together, or we're going to just have a pajama day today. We're breaking the rules, right? We're doing our own thing together. So it can create that sense of camaraderie. And then just make sure our kids always know that we love them. Meaningful words, writing little notes, making sure that we have those light up moments when we see our kids after a long day at school or something. Those mean so much. And this isn't about like empty praise. It's not about you're so great. And but it's really, you know, it's that moment of like, gosh, you know what? You're really cool. I really like hanging out with you. I really appreciate how you do this, you know, just really authentically appreciating and noticing our kids. So the last thing I share before I go to Q&A, and now it just went to like the second slide. Here we go, is that fostering deep connection is an action. So like everything that we do, it's something, just like any relationship we're in, we show up. I show up to my husband, Darren. We commit every day to show up and be there for each other. It's our intention. And it's the same with our kids. Fostering a deep connection is setting an intention every day to work toward a deeper state of connection with our kids. So think of it as an active state, not kind of a decision, and then we move on. Okay. So I am going to stop sharing my screen. You guys can, I'm sure there's plenty of ways to find out how to connect with me. So I'm going to stop sharing and see if we have any questions. Sorry, I blew through a lot of stuff fast. So I hope there's a couple concepts in there that stuck with you or that you can play with.
Well, thank you so much for that presentation. I really appreciate many of the comments that you made, and we'll be emphasizing that as we go along. Before we get started, I'm supposed to take a moment and ask for a registration poll because we'd like to know in the poll where you what publication you registered with. So we really appreciate you just sort of going on and telling us where you're from. You're hearkening from and your registration site. So thank you again. Debbie, in reviewing the questions that came in advance of the event, I noticed that there were parents that were at various places in their journey with their differently wired child. Some were at the very beginning thinking, oh, I think I have one, to, you know, all the way to, I think I get most of your material, but I still wonder, I struggle with operationalizing it. And then some that are launching like you are. So I thought what we do is address the questions almost like sequentially and developmentally. So one of the things that I love about your book is the beginning part where you describe what it's like to come to awareness that you have a differently wired child. And you're aware that many people, teachers and other people, are using these words to describe your child. They're often words like disruptive. There are words like oppositional and defiant. I have to say, as a psychologist, ODD, oppositional and defiant disorder, is my biggest pet peeve diagnosis. And part of the reason, of course, is that they're describing with adjectives the difficulties they're having with a differently wired child, because upstream, the child has not been interacted with in the ways that you describe, with deep listening, understanding, and empathy. And then that's just the outcome. So what happens is a lot of people are struggling with, I don't want to label my child, but don't I have to get a diagnosis to get services and some extra help? So let me use one of these questions to edify that. What should you do when you have the suspicion that you might need an evaluation? Should you go to the pediatrician, request an evaluation with your school system? What do I need? What do I do about getting a diagnosis so I can get services?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I think it really depends. I mean, I will say sometimes pediatricians, depending on how your kid shows up and how regulated they might be at an appointment, the pediatrician might not see anything to indicate that you would want a further assessment or evaluation, I would say if you as a parent suspect that something is going on and maybe you're getting feedback from teachers and, notes or calls or things about dysregulation in certain environments and you're suspecting something's going on, I do think it's worth trying to get more information, and the school may help you with that. It really depends on the school. Like a private school wouldn't facilitate that, and a public school may not, because they don't want to necessarily pay for that, depending on how it's impacting the student. So a lot of people choose to do a private assessment or evaluation. I absolutely think it's worth getting more information, not because it's going to solve a problem or give you this kind of play-by-play, here's how to address and fix these challenging behavior, but it can put things in context so you have a deeper understanding about how your kid's experiencing the world, and it can help guide you not only in getting accommodations and support and knowing what to push for, but also just to help you understand at a deeper level, like what is really challenging for this child, what's going on with their nervous system or their sensory inputs, or what can be highly dysregulating, so that you can start to just be aware of that in the way that you parent. I know a lot of people are worried about labels and stigma and all of that stuff. And of course, like that is, I get it. I had to do my own work to kind of get comfortable with some of the labels that, my child was identified as having early on. But really that stuff's about us. I believe that we can kind of change stigma by talking openly about what is our kid. There's nothing wrong with our kids. If they have ADHD or they're autistic or whatever is happening, that's how their brain's wired, and that's perfect for who they are. So I think it's worth getting that information. And then if we're struggling with that, our own fear, that's where we want to do our own work, so it doesn't interfere with the way that we show up for our kids.
Yeah, and after all, we're all going to destigmatize all these words if we admit that we're all on some spectrum of something. And that's a strength and weakness, and difference, not deficit, a mindset. So
yes,
indeed. Parents are sort of enlightened about the need for empathy, understanding, and awareness of differences, but they're still kind of struggling with how to pull this off. So here's a classic question from the audience. How do I help my atypical child see me as a helpful guide instead of someone critiquing and attacking him when I redirect?
Oh, that's a good question. And I would love to get a window into what redirecting actually looks like. I think one of the biggest things we want to do is notice our own energy and interactions with our kids. If we go into an interaction with our child with an agenda, our kids are going to know it. If we're trying to get a certain outcome and we're attached to what that outcome, if the outcome is like, I want this behavior to change, I want to get out of the house on time, I want this, whatever that is, at a deeper level, our own anxiety, fear, stress, frustration is going to be influencing the dynamic. Our kids are really tuned in to our emotional energy. So with this question, I would first check myself and be like, okay, what am I attached to in this situation? And how am I contributing to a dynamic? Because we want our kids to, we don't want our kids to get defensive when we say something to them or have a request. I'm a big fan of declarative language, which is something that Linda Murphy wrote a great book called the Declarative Language Handbook, especially for neurodivergent kids, especially demand avoiding kids who may get their shackles up very easily if we ask them to do something, and they will see us in that light. Declarative language is a way of just communicating with our kids that is it's not directive. It's kind of like, I notice, or I'd like to do this, as opposed to do this, or asking questions. Why aren't you doing this? Can you help me with this? Oh, I'm emptying the dishwasher. I'd love if I could get some help. So it kind of is a reframe in the way that we communicate with our kids. And so their instinct isn't to get defensive, because they're going to feel like we're we're on their back about something, it's going to help them have a deeper sense of control. So I know I'm going off on a bit of a tangent, but just to bring it back to the core question, if you're in that cycle, it sounds like you're in a cycle where, you know, your kid's reacting a certain way and you have these things that you want done. It's totally fine to have expectations for our kids, but I would start by getting clear on my energy and trying to not be attached to any outcome, getting curious about how can I collaborate with my child to make this happen. And then notice the language that you're using and maybe play with something that doesn't feel as demanding.
Right. Thanks. I think that's one of the biggest challenges. Sometimes you just say, okay, I've given you the reminders, but now, and we have the timers, but now we have to go to school, or
Yeah.
Your feelings, but when you slam the clay down on the table like that, the neighbors upstairs can't sleep, so you need to stop. So we try all these ways to try to finesse situations, but if it even feels coercive or demanding, and one of the phrases you use that I love is that we need to face that we're demand factories. I couldn't agree with you more. You know, boot camp all the time. We have and when they know our agenda and they feel it, our need to have them comply right now, it undermines it. So using that language is much harder than it sounds. So
yeah, it's a practice.
Let's talk a little bit about family adjustment. Part of the journey that you talk so eloquently about is grieving the life that you thought you'd have as a family, letting go of being judged or caring about how people might judge you, and of course learning to embrace the acceptance and understanding and the quality of the relationship as your goal rather than some other outcome. But then some of the parents were saying, yeah, I'm doing this, but you know, what about the outside world? And here's a great question from the audience. From a very early age, my kid has operated on the default assumption that peers interact from a place of aggression and competition. How do I get him to lead with kindness and foster connections if others are mean? Any tips for middle school transition?
Oh gosh. First of all, read Phyllis Nagel's book, Middle School Superpowers, which is such a good book about this very complicated time of life. I think, I'm not sure if I'm interpreting this question accurately, but what I'm hearing is maybe even some rejection sensitive dysphoria in terms of, which is common, very common with a lot of kids with ADHD and other neurodivergent kids, is like feeling judged by other kids, or this sense of perceived criticism, and really struggling with all of that. And that's really tricky. Like it's not kind of a quick fix. It's part of this, I think, is helping our kids and helping your child understand their own kind of cognitive way of navigating and experiencing the world, and weaving that into, this is how your brain is wired. And so because of the way that your brain is wired, these situations can be especially hard for you, and here's why, and you're not alone in that, and here are some of the things that we can do to help you work on it, so it doesn't have to feel so upsetting to you, but at the same time really just validating, like, that is really hard, and it's really tricky. And I'm here, you know, we want to, through this, right, fostering connection, I'm here for you. Thank you for talking with me about this. Let's see what we can learn together. Let's experiment. We can role play with kids, especially in this age. I think we can come up with some scripts and some strategies and role play it so that when they're in the moment, they can feel a little bit more prepared. I do want to just say that with our kids, with all kids, but especially neurodivergent kids, like, change is slow. And I'm sorry to say that, but it's very true. Like, our kids often need a lot of evidence and a lot of practice in order to really shift things, their worldview, or these kind of really more deeply ingrained ways of seeing and thinking about the world. And so that can be hard as a parent, because we want to give them our wisdom. We got the strategy. We want you to kind of make this shift, because we recognize that it's hard for our kids and that they're probably experiencing more discomfort or pain or frustration. And we want to protect them from that. But I just want to throw it out. It's a marathon, what we're doing here. We're running like ultra marathons.
Emphasizing is that as they move, as they mature, especially in the middle school, they're supposed to be in other social groups, and we can't be the ones they come to, and we empathize about how hard it is out there with those. The questioner was about mean peers. So a lot of what we're doing is being creative about finding social groups where there might be a sympathetic and skilled adult that supervises the magic group, or might be a group with D&D that we know other peers will be kind. So sometimes we're just brokering good experiences for them on the swim team or whatever. So it takes a lot of creativity to find social groups positive and affirming and understanding. Now, I want to talk about school, because so many questions are about motivating their child in school. So a lot of the questions are, how do I motivate them, which already is a tricky question. But I want to direct people, advise them to go to your podcast, Debbie, especially with Seth Perler. And you talk so much about strategies for homework time or supervising academic work, or collaborating, I should say. You and Seth Perler have so many great strategies. So go to her podcast. But here are several questions that I bunched up so that you could address them. How do I talk about expectations without their shutting down? I check my middle schooler's binders, school classroom notes, and homework, but he doesn't remember anything about his school day when I ask him. Wonder why? And how do I make sure he doesn't fall behind? Lastly, my child has huge sensory issues. We have tried charts, incentives, sensory activities. Any more ideas for calming his nervous system down so that we can get to school?
Oh my goodness, there's so much there. I'm going to throw out one other book, sorry, because you guys should or listen to my episode with Dr. Ellen Broughton. She wrote a great book called Bright Kids Who Couldn't Care Less. She also wrote the book Bright Kids Who Can't Keep Up, about processing speed, but her new book is about motivation. It was so good, and it really helps us understand what is going on with our kids, and do they really not care? What does it mean to not be motivated? And because, as you said, Laura, when you asked that question, like, how can I make my kid, like, we can't make our kids care about anything. Like, I have tried, I believe me, it is not possible. So that's where we have to start, is just recognizing that. And one of the things Seth Perler and I talk about often is buy-in, how important it is that our kids are bought into what's going on. And that's not necessarily like trying to find, the carrot that's going to help them kind of move forward, but more, how can we leverage their deep interests, their strengths, their passions, their Minecraft, whatever it is, to kind of support them in other areas. And I also think it's really important to ask our kids, do you care about this? Like, I start with that always, like, talking about checking the grades. And I just interviewed Deborah Heitner for my podcast about her book, Growing Up in Public. And we talked a lot about how those grading apps really are presenting problems for our kids learning executive function skills. And especially because we're now obsessed with them, it's creating stress for us. We're checking all the things. We know exactly, I mean, oh my gosh, I was a disaster in middle school and high school. If my parents had access to the inner workings of my class, things have been a lot worse than they already were. So I would really collaborate with our kids and ask them, do you care? Like, I noticed, right, this class, this is happening, or, does it matter to you? Because if it doesn't matter to your kid, you're going to be creating conflict and trying to force them to do something that they don't want to do. Sometimes they care, but they don't think they can do it. Oftentimes they care, but they just don't have the skills to do it. And so that's a different story. All right, I hear you. Let's see what we can figure it out together. And again, slow baby steps, working slowly. I know there was part of that question at the end that was about nervous system regulation. I think, again, with everything, it's always like looking under the hood. I think about Mona Hook's work and talking about like the iceberg theory and seeing what's really going on. And if our kids are not having school refusal, there's a reason. So how can we get curious to understand what is underlying the anxiety, the stress response that is making going to school so hard? Because we have to, our kids, they're not going to learn anything even if they go to school, if they're in fight or flight, like what's the point, right? So I think if our kid is experiencing that level of distress, then we do want to start to get curious and really try. And it might take a while to find out what's really going on. What is the underlying anxiety or stressor? And how can we start to work on that so that our kids feel safer going to school?
Right. I mean, it takes so many different tricks sometimes. But just to say, we need to get in the car and not be late for school and not make your siblings late for school again is almost for sure going to actually arouse them further and down regulate them. Sometimes that's a good time to go rogue and just say, I think, I want a chocolate drink to go or something, and I'll meet you in the kitchen. Let's race backwards or something. Sometimes that disarming reset reboot can, especially for younger children, can work a lot better than we need to get in the car right now. But it's so natural to be rational and to talk about other people's feelings, like, the people that live in the apartment upstairs or that your siblings are in the car. It's so much mind over matter. And first starting with calming oneself so we can be creative.
Yes.
Debbie, I want to talk about something a little high level for a lot of people that are in the mud, if you will, trying to solve some of these problems or having conflict with their kids. And that is at the family system level. You talked a little bit about the siblings, but another gift you give your audiences is when you talk about you and your husband, Darren, who, I mean, I cried when I listened to those episodes because I've been in those sessions with people with, I hate to be gender normative here, but moms are often the ones doing the most. And I just read a question from one of the questioners. She goes, I'm so sick of meeting the needs of all the men in my house that are neurodivergent. I went, oh, I get you, girl. Because you get so tired of being the one holding everything. And Darren, your husband, was so articulate saying, well, I did feel unskilled. And then I'm so unskilled, I didn't know how to get in. And then I wanted some of the love that you were giving to, our son. And it's so important to realize not only do we need to have oxygen to self to parent, but we need good energy for the whole family system. So would you talk about that, whatever you call it, lopsided, lagging behind parent and the family system just a little bit for the sake of most of them are going through it?
Yeah. And I just re-released those 2 episodes that I did with my husband, and I didn't prepare him for those. So I was like in a different room and I was kind of like blown away with how vulnerable he was. So if you're, I recommend people check those out. I mean, I think it's also like, it's intense work, like and it's not perfect. And part of it, I think is for us, if we are the ones, and my hunch is most of the people who are here today are the ones doing the majority of the emotional labor and the other labor involved in raising these complex kids, we have to kind of recognize where we are maybe withholding information, maybe we are resentful of our partner not being as engaged. Maybe our partner is super engaged, but we're still feeling like things aren't even. I mean, my husband doesn't listen to my podcast, right? I have to like remind him 20 times, like, this was a good episode, listen to this one. So that's still where we are. But we're committed to kind of navigating this together. And I really had to, I'll just say, like, work on, and I think it's important, if you're the one doing all the stuff, like, think about, what am I holding on to? Or am I resentful with this person? Am I not seeing my partner with compassion? Am I expecting my partner to be on the exact same page as me on all the things and read all the books and do all the things? That's not realistic, I've learned. And starting to look at my partner as like, okay, we both contribute very different things to our family dynamic and to our dynamic in parenting our kid. And so I've had to like reframe and learn to respect and appreciate the things that my husband does that I can't do. I've also had to rely on him more, which is super uncomfortable for me because I like to do like feel like I can handle everything and I can't. And so me relying on him more, it's been messy, but it also makes him feel more invested and involved. So we've had to like repattern our relationship. But I feel like I have a real partner in this journey now. And that's made a huge difference. Yeah, I don't know. I hope that answered your question.
It's making space for them to have a learning curve, just like we did, but maybe ours was years ago, right? So
Yeah,
it's the messy
exactly.
It's absolutely worth it. So thank you for that. We've had many questions about the resources mentioned, and they're all going to be on emails to you, along with resources that Debbie has been so kind to give us. So we have lots of resources. You get the recording that's associated with this event, and lots of recommendations. So not to worry about losing any of the threads here. So I want to thank Debbie especially. I want to thank our media partners. I want to encourage you to sign up for the rest of the lectures in the video series. Our next one is The Power of Relationships, Nurturing Compassion and Resilience in Children with Sam Goldstein and Robert Brooks. So I'll see you then. And thanks again, Debbie.
Thank you, Laura. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.